Pelosi is now the highest-ranking U.S. lawmaker to visit Ukraine during Russia's invasion. Joining me now, former Connecticut Senator, United Against Nuclear Iran chairman, and former Democratic vice presidential nominee, Joe Lieberman. Good to see you, Senator. Always a pleasure. Just your reaction to Speaker Pelosi's visit to Ukraine and its significance.
Sure. Thanks, Tegan. Good to be back with you. Well, I think it was a significant visit by Speaker Pelosi, and undoubtedly very reassuring to President Zelensky, and the Ukrainian fighters. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. She is in the line of succession to the presidency. She comes right after the vice president, and her presence there physically in Kiev was a great statement that the support that President Biden, increasing support President Biden has given to Ukraine, is not just personal. He's got a lot of support in Congress. I will say this. I wish that this delegation that Speaker Pelosi led to Ukraine over the weekend was bipartisan.
Yes,
I wish there were some Republican House members there, because from all that I can tell, speaking to members of the House, the support for helping Ukraine against Russia is broadly bipartisan. And I think it would have been a powerful statement if the delegation that the Speaker led was bipartisan as well. Maybe Kevin McCarthy should go now on his own with a Republican delegation. I think that would make a statement too. But I don't want to diminish what Speaker Pelosi did. It was a real step forward, but it could have been even stronger if her delegation was bipartisan.
Well, is it safe to say, Senator, though, again, as much as this was a show of support for Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, and their incredible fight, it was also political in nature, certainly to distract from the problems here at home. So if it was a bipartisan trip, the Democrats potentially would not enjoy the full benefit of the trip.
Well, you know, maybe I don't have the ability to make that judgment because it's about personal motivations. But, you know, as we all know, it's a deeply partisan time on Capitol Hill in Washington, but you've got to be able to rise above it occasionally and reach across the aisle and work with the other party. And I think this is one of those cases. So I think it would have been a much more powerful statement if the Pelosi delegation to Ukraine over the weekend had some leading House Republicans as well.
Moving on to something that you are on top of, among many things, European officials are reportedly preparing to make a fresh push to save the Iran nuclear deal. The European Union offering to send its top negotiator to Tehran to break a stalemate in talks over the Iranian demands that the U.S. lift the terrorist designation of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. offered to lift that designation for the IRGC if Tehran agreed not to attack Americans or try to assassinate current or former U.S. officials, but Iran dismissed that offer. Senator Lieberman, why the pursuit of this bad deal and dangerous deal?
Yeah, that's exactly the right question. I mean, it seems to me that for the Europeans to go hat in hand to Tehran to try to convince the Iranians to come back and negotiate a deal that is good for them and bad for Europe and the U.S. just is foolish, and it's dangerous, in fact. And it also says that there are some people in Europe, and I'm afraid some in the U.S., who are so blinded by their desire for a nuclear agreement with Iran at any cost that they've lost their peripheral vision. They're not connecting the fact that we are essentially at war with Russia because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We are fighting for democracy, for human rights. And at the same time, Iran is a client state an ally of Russia's. They are, in my opinion, the new axis of evil. They work together financially, militarily. Iran and Russia work together to skirt the sanctions that the Europeans and we put on them for their malignant behavior. And Russia has literally midwifed this agreement with Iran that's on the table. Now, the idea of removing sanctions against the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has the blood of hundreds and hundreds of Americans on its hands, is just infuriating. What do I think the policy should be toward the Iran nuclear negotiations? I think we should leave the negotiations. And they only will help Iran and Russia. Let the economic pressure grow on Iran, and let us help our allies in Ukraine to stop Russia. That'll be the best thing we can do to help bring a time of peace to the world.
And this is the insanity of what Europe is doing, and to a lesser extent the United States, Senator.
Right.
So Europe's trying to get off of Russian oil and natural gas, but Russian oil. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates have enough excess production capacity to completely offset, or almost offset, all the oil that Europe gets from Russia. But Saudi Arabia has been certainly reluctant to pump any more because the West, Europe and the United States, have turned their backs on Saudi Arabia. So you're going to saddle up to Iran when you need the oil from these other nations. Like, even just economically, it doesn't make any sense.
You are so right. You're right on target, and a lot of the pieces of the world situation come together. You know, you got to remember who your friends are and who your enemies are. And the Arab nations of the Middle East are our allies, long time. So every time we sort of cozy up, or in a way genuflect to the Iranians to reach a nuclear agreement, we shake the confidence of the Arab world. And when we then turn to them and say, please start pumping more oil so we can replace oil and gas to Europe, they say, how can we rely on you, and why should we do you this favor when you seem to be much more focused on Iran than you are on us? And we're asking for a lot of trouble here, and I think we've got to come back and treat our allies as allies, and our enemies like Iran as enemies. And that's a much better way forward.
Senator Joe Lieberman, always a pleasure. Always such a terrific discussion with you, Senator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Day, and be well. Have a good day.
You too. Blessings to you and your family.
God bless you.